Hello and welcome to the second Heroic Review. In this episode we're going to be discussing the fanfic March to the Scaffold by FoxyKimchi. Scribbler, could you give us our introduction?
Chrysalis is brought to Canterlot to stand trial for her failed invasion. Thinking her fate is sealed, she is determined to be defiant to the very end. Loosely based on March to the Scaffold, the fourth movement of the musical piece Symphonie Fantastique by Hector Berlioz.
I'm Deadlyreg, I play Mr. Waddle, and I will be the moderator this time. Joining me, we have Goombasa. Say hello, Goombasa.
Hello, everybody.
And who do you play, Goombasa?
I play Razor the Crystal Pony, which you probably won't see until episode 3, I believe.
Yeah.
We also have Pounce. Say hello, Pounce.
Hello, Pounce.
And who do you play, Pounce?
I play Bucket Mopsworthy the Brave, and also Stephen Magnet, dear.
We also have the lovely Reverb Brony. Say hello.
Hey, how you going, Chris?
I'm doing fine. And who do you play on the show?
I don't play anyone in particular. I do all the music.
And we also have Scribbler. I think you're in this as well, yeah?
Greetings.
And who do you play, Scribbler?
I play Honey Buzz.
And we have the lovely Swedely. Hello, Swedely.
Hello, everyone.
And who do you play, Swedely?
I play Worm.
And finally, but not least, we have Webshoter. Hello, Webshoter.
Hello.
And who do you play, Webshoter?
I play Go Ahead of Thunderguts.
And that's the panel for this time. So, let's get right into it. This first part, we're going to do an overview of the story, and it's going to be spoiler-free for everyone who wants our general opinion to see whether or not it's worth your time. The second part, the longer part, will be us analysing the fic in greater detail, and that is spoilerific, so we'll put in the show notes whenabouts you'll need to switch off. Otherwise, enjoy the show. So, first up, the tags on this fic are romance, sad, and dark. So we can discuss the appropriateness of that now. So, what was everyone's opinion of the story, starting with you, Goombasa?
I enjoyed it for the most part. I don't know. I'm still confused because there are a lot of elements in it that just, yeah, we'll get into that in deeper discussion.
Pounce, your opinion of this particular story?
I think that the fic was actually... it was fun to read. It was a good read, but at the same time, it was a little heavy on the cliche, which made it a little tough to get through at times. But I think I think it was you, Scribbler, told me that all fan fiction is sort of cliche. So I kind of looked past it, and it was actually an enjoyable read. Although there were parts that we will discuss later that I just had issues with. But later, darling, later.
We're going heavy on the foreshadowing this time.
Scribbler, your opinion?
I'm going to concentrate on the tags just because I've got them in front of me because I have something to say about them. Romance? Yeah, definitely. However, I think it did what a lot of fics do when they have a romance tag, and it's, this is the most important part of this fiction and you will pay attention to it now! And, yeah, that... I know that the majority of fanfiction is pairing-based. I have been in fandom a hell of a long time. And this is the pattern. It has always been, it will always be. But romance fic is very, very rarely done well. When you append the other two genres that are also not done very well, sad and dark, it doesn't exactly prime you to think that this is going to be an especially good story. And for the most part, speaking from a technical point of view, it was a competently written story. I wouldn't say it was a well-written story. I would say it was competently written. It didn't have many grammatical errors. Its SPAG, as I call it, spelling, punctuation, and grammar, was all intact. But the story itself, I felt, started off promisingly, had the potential to go a hell of a lot of good places, and had the length, the number of chapters and word count involved, had the length to make me think, ooh, I'm in for something really good here. And then, in my personal opinion, shit the bed.
Well put. Well put. Yeah, I'll agree with that. Webshoter, your opinion?
I enjoyed it. I will agree with a bit with Scribbler about how on the romance it nailed it. Sad and dark, a little bit. As for the last part, well, each to their own.
In my opinion, I kind of agree with Scribbler. The fic started pretty well. It continued to be fairly enjoyable, but it kind of went places at the end. It wasn't really dark. I'd say maybe tragedy, if we're being generous, but it felt really forced a lot of the time, that there was boxes the author wanted to tick as to an outcome, and that the author kind of just did them rather than building up to them, which was annoying. So, Jason, your opinion?
Well, instead of actually reading it, I listened to Illya Leonov's reading of it, which I really loved, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, I actually disagree a little bit with you guys. I think the start is really quite dark, and without spoiling what happens after that, I mean, yeah, it becomes less dark after that. In regards to my opinion of how it goes towards the end, I'm not quite as, what's the word? I don't read as much as probably a lot of you guys do.
The word is well-read.
Well-read. I'm not quite as well-read as you guys. I mean, I suppose I was just so caught up with the story from the start that I was just so in love with it. I was just carried to the end.
So I think, in everyone's general opinion is, read it, but don't expect miracles. Am I right here?
Yeah.
That pretty much sums it up, I think.
It's still good to read, but yeah, don't expect heavy dark or heavy sad.
Actually, you brought up a pretty good point there, Reverb. You said you weren't as well read as the rest of us, and I mean, well, I don't know if that's true or not.
It is.
It's actually something to consider that this story is probably quite enjoyable for someone who isn't going to really delve. I mean, I think we all read this with the intention of, looking for things to talk about, but if you're just reading it for the story, it's a decent ride. I mean, it's not like you're gonna get through it and be like, oh, man, I'm so glad that's over. But I feel like, we were kind of picking it apart in some places. Like you and Scribble said that it did a poo in the bed.
We did say that.
And I mean, yeah, well, there are parts of the story that did that. I mean, it wasn't like, it was an enjoyable ride. I'm going to say that again. The ride was good. It wasn't like painful to read.
Yes, it was an enjoyable ride, like the roller coaster before you puke.
You've got a point that the story, the actual story itself, the ideas that are in here aren't bad. That's probably its saving grace, as much as we can pick apart the way it's presented. What it's presenting is pretty good. The ideas the authors had are pretty good.
I didn't think it was a good ride. I think it had some nice ideas, but even as just reading it as a fanfic, there were places where I think the premise was the only good thing about it, to be honest.
Did it seem like it was jumpy? Like, as soon as you get through one section, it would all of a sudden go, hey, you're over here now.
Well, I thought that the bits I wanted to read, the bits I would have been interested to hear about, were in the opening chapters, and I would have liked to see some development.
This fic is entirely about Chrysalis and the Changelings. So we can have a quick touch on how the Chrysalis and Changelings are presented in the fandom, referencing this in particular, looking at how the portrayal varies from canon to fanon. I'd just like to make the point that Cancelot Wedding, the part which actually introduced Chrysalis, aired April the 1st, 2012, and from what I could gather, this fiction first got published 21st of May, so there was only about a month's worth of fanon to build on when this came out.
You say only. This is ponydom. That's ages.
Or that's including them actually writing it. They could have started writing it the day after.
Well, we don't know how long after the thing. Well, the first part was written. So certainly it might have been influenced by a lot of what came after it.
Fanon portrayal of Chrysalis, and we should state right away that if you cannot see Chrysalis as a sympathetic villain, you are not going to enjoy this fiction at all. And I have talked to people who have that issue. Canon Chrysalis is probably the most irredeemably evil character I have seen in MLP.
Really? Over Sombra?
Why is that?
That has a personality.
Oh.
Okay, fair enough.
Especially if you take into account later canon of her, like, in the comics, especially one infamous panel. But Fanon portrayal, most of the time, especially people who like to see her redeemed or as a more sympathetic character, love to portray her as a well-intentioned extremist.
That's a good way of looking at her. She's looking after people.
Yeah, and this fiction does that in spades, portraying her as somebody who was only going to try and get a little bit of love, just enough to feed, and then she started getting greedy, sort of trying to justify the invasion, in a way.
Anyone anything to add? Scribbler?
I agree with a lot with what Goombasa just said, apart from the part where you interjected and said she was just trying to feed her people, and I can't say why without giving spoilers.
We're in spoiler territory. You can spoil whatever you like now.
Okay. She killed off a whole people! That does not sound like safeguarding the future of your race if you send them off to war and go, oops, they're all dead.
She tries to justify it in the epilogue, which the epilogue of this story, I feel, is extraordinarily tacked on. I don't like the epilogue at all when Twilight comes into the picture all of a sudden.
The fic itself originally ended with author's notes on 2nd of December 2012, and the epilogue appeared on 25th of May 2013.
Yeah, so we've got about a 5-month gap before the epilogue was published.
Definitely tacked on.
Yeah, like I said, the epilogue feels extremely tacked on in that, again, it tries to really try to make you feel sorry for Chrysalis and try to make her seem as the biggest well-intentioned, the biggest wooby in the world, basically. It tries to make her sound like a Vietnam War vet, how she's talking about how tired she is to Twilight. I honestly feel that ending on Chrysalis's letter to Celestia would have been much better than this tacked-on epilogue.
It does make you wonder why it appeared.
The author clearly wrote this with an intention to, I wouldn't say really redeem Chrysalis, but he definitely wanted to pull her out of the depths of meanie villainhood, if that's a technical term for you.
That is the technical term.
They wrote the fic pretty much with almost the sole intention of pulling her out of the depths of villainhood and giving her her own happy story with a happy ending. I almost feel like this is almost FoxyKimchi's sort of way of writing how he wished Chrysalis had ended instead of just being flung off into the Badlands after a Canterlot wedding.
I think, just to make the point, in Fanon, she's usually presented like an insect queen, where all the minions are drones, and she's the queen bee, and none of her subjects have an agenda. None of her subjects have an intention. The only person or creature in the group is her. She's the only one who actually intends anything or wants anything. And all of her subjects are essentially willing slaves to her will, which is kind of really insecty. When we look at the only other place she's been marginally canon, which is the comics, we've got the Changelings talking back to her. They've got their subjects rather than sort of mindless drones.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty much how I've always seen them. This fanfic, March of the Scaffold, is the only one that I've actually come across where the changeling drones are just mindless servants instead of individual beings that are working underneath one queen.
I see it sort of 50% most of the time. I've read plenty of fics that portray Chrysalis as the one true consciousness behind the changelings, and there are a lot of other fics that take a different approach and show them as individuals who are just obscenely loyal, especially if they happen to be starring individual OC changelings. A very popular idea with changelings is them going off and discovering that there is a life beyond the hive, which I actually really like. Heck, my first fanfic that I published was a sort of sympathetic Chrissy story where she instigates a forced march that basically kills off all of her drones, except for one who's extraordinarily loyal to her. So I take it both ways. I've seen it go both ways quite a bit, and they've both been done well. They've both been done poorly.
For me, it comes down to how well executed any given scenario is. I'm willing to accept a hell of a lot because Canon gave us so very little, but it does come down to how well people are able to convince me. And if you have jumped from set piece to set piece, not giving much justification, or if you've done all telling, no showing, or all showing, no telling, and not made me care, then it wouldn't matter what setup you've used. It would just matter that I was bored. Redemption stories for villains have always kind of happened. I mean, Canon has done it with Trixie in a very ham-fisted way, but they did it. But I think the redemption story for March of the Scaffold was not given the time it needed to breathe. That with whole Chrysalis and the Changelings and how major things happened that were just either sidelined or happened off stage or briefly referred to and then never referred to again. The length that this story is, it had the scope to do this properly, but instead it didn't. And I have issues with this other fic, but there is another one in fandom that's really famous that did the redemption of a villain thing well, and that's Past Sins. I think March the Scaffold is trying to do for Chrysalis what Past Sins did for Nightmare Moon, and it just didn't do it right.
I mean, the whole thing felt like it was like they were shoving Chrysalis through the redemption process really fast. It's like, you're a pony. Get a job. Oh no, you lost the job. Find really nice ponies. Keep this job. Oh my god, there's a stallion. Oh look, they met each other. Oh, they went on one date. Holy crap, I love him. Oh, he's hurt. Oh, he's better. Holy crap, we love each other at the end. It's like, wow. She just went through like the whole gambit of like everything and so fast. It didn't really have time to get mature and delicious.
Yeah, I think that was my point. My issue was that it didn't give us time to process what was happening before the next thing happened.
If we can focus on an individual idea for a second, I'm wondering what people thought of how this fic portrayed the origins of changelings, the idea that they are not their own natural race, but were created via magical means.
Well, I didn't like it.
I've never seen it done before, so I have to give it credit for originality.
It was indeed a nice twist to a lot of the other setups that have been seen.
I thought it was really good, the way that it was painted as like a siren type creature from mythology. I thought it was really good. I really, really liked it.
I thought it was good in that it at least got me to view the race in a new light, but in terms of execution, well, it didn't really make me change my mind about the changelings. I still prefer them to be their own natural race in Equestria, alongside like diamond dogs, griffins, dragons, and of course ponies.
We don't actually have that many canon races other than ponies that are intelligent and have civilizations, so it's nice to see them. I think I couldn't say it was a good idea, but it was an interesting idea. It's almost exciting to get something that's new. This is a new take on them. In the author's notes, the author more or less confirms that the changelings are created by a spell rather than being a natural species, was created solely to explain how Celestia could cure her. It was author fiat rather than sort of a conceived thing at the start. But for that, I think it's actually one of the best, most interesting parts of the whole fiction. That idea encapsulates this whole fiction to me. It's a good idea that's presented really badly.
Yeah.
Which is kind of why it reminds me so much of Indigo Prophecy.
Yes. Jason, anything to add?
Yeah, a few different things. With the changelings, someone said that Chrysalis just basically had them all wiped out.
I think it was me who made, and I was sort of venturing into hyperbole in that. I don't think she purposefully killed them off, but I don't think she really mourned them when they were gone.
That's right. At the very start, they said the story was set up with Chrysalis seeming like the audience should be feeling that they're on her side straight away, because she's saying she did this to feed her changelings, etc., etc. Except I thought she only really kind of briefly mentioned that she did this to feed her people, while almost literally spitting in Celestia's face. So I thought that sort of rendition of her being defiant and very, very unapologetic and not looking for any sympathy whatsoever was really quite good in painting her in a slightly more canon kind of unforgiving way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it was sort of so you don't feel it was the author trying to give her an in-character justification. It's just something she's sort of spitting at Celestia that she doesn't expect to tag. I can see what you mean, that it's not really outright intended as a redemptive statement. She's not trying to sway anybody over with it. She's just making the statement. But it's built on later. It is built on later to partially justify what she has to say and what she did. But at the time, no, it's not really intended as a redemptive thing. It doesn't play it as a redemptive thing. But the way it's written, it doesn't really play anything. The tone's kind of flat through the story. So I can see what you mean.
Something else I was going to say, sorry, I remember what it was now. Someone was saying that she didn't really seem like she cared about her changelings because she basically sent them all to war to fight and die, thus making her excuse for invading and getting love for everyone rather redundant. Except I was thinking, I sort of saw that as two separate things. She came to Canterlot to get love and feed her changelings, etc., etc. The way I saw the story is I thought that happened with the whole Canterlot wedding. We know that. And then after all that, after they were blown away, then the Royal Guard, the ponies, etc., sort of tracked them down to wipe them out. And that's when it was sort of like that huge pride sort of thing of the changelings just refused to give up. So I saw that as two separate things.
It should be noted that they were not tracking them down to wipe them out. Princess Celestia did give her the option to surrender. She was the one who decided to stand and fight. So I just needed to mention that. They were not planning to wipe them out.
Oh, okay. No, I might have assumed that myself.
No, you did say earlier it was more or less a point of pride with her, and that's more or less what it was. She was too proud to surrender, so she ended up getting everybody killed, which does give her kind of a less sympathetic edge, that she basically got everybody murdered that were her children.
I would say it does say something about the quality of the writing in that section, if it was so ambiguous that Reverb thought it was one thing, and it must have just been a throwaway line somewhere that Goombasa picked up on and he didn't. But it can't have been that overt if it was that easily missed.
I'm pretty sure I remember, because I read this like 3 weeks ago, as soon as it was announced for the discussion. But I swear there was a line where she pretty much says, I ordered them to make a last stand.
I think it was during the epilogue when she's talking to Twilight. If it's not mentioned before, I'm pretty sure it's mentioned in the first chapter, but it's definitely mentioned in the epilogue.
Yeah.
Also, something else, the whole literally starving to death thing that she refers to a fair bit as to why she stayed and kept feeding on shining armor, which I thought that was a pretty realistic sort of thing. I for one couldn't imagine literally starving to death pretty much all your life and then having that suddenly turn around. I could imagine that as quite a powerful, overwhelming feeling.
I think as well in that second chapter, when we're talking about, there is a lot of Celestia talking about the ponies of Canterlot as her children, and I think that's intended more or less as a direct comparison between what Chrysalis chose to do with her children and what Celestia did with hers. Where Chrysalis more or less got all of her children killed, Celestia was trying to keep Chrysalis's children alive and acting to protect her own at the same time, because she's great. She gets to have that option. So I think that in the text there is intended pretty much to be a comparison to the audience directly. I don't know if anyone else feels the same.
One other thing, sorry, this is just my last note that I noted down. There was talk between the changeling drones and whether or not sort of different examples of when they do and don't have their own sort of character and personality. And we were saying in a lot of fiction, they do have their own personality and in some cases original characters. Except in the actual Canterlot wedding itself, I saw them entirely as pretty much mindless drones.
The character design did seem to support that.
Okay, in the Canterlot wedding, in the big fight scene where they're all like, pew, 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 right? And the one is in front of Pinkie Pie and it's shifting and she's like, oh, do me. It rolls its eyes. It was like, and then it transforms into her.
No, I remember that.
They're not really given a lot of time to breathe in what we've seen. Let's do a quick recap of the story. At the start of the story, Chrysalis has been captured and brought in before Celestia and Luna, and
you forgot something. You forgot the crowd of commoners enjoying the fact that their loved ones and soldiers are home, and then all of a sudden they get up to the upper half of Canterlot where the nobles are shouting for blood and having pitchforks and torques.
And throwing stones?
Yeah, throwing stones at the cage. Yes, thank you for reminding me. So Chrysalis is paraded.
Ponies who can fly, who have airships and teleportation spells, drag her cage through the streets.
Well, to be fair, if I recall correctly, her cage had wheels, and the guards were also scared, so they were trying to double time it to the palace.
This was more or less a reference to a march to the scaffold, in that it was the parade before the crowd of the wronged. It's a direct rip from revolutionary France.
Just because it was a direct rip doesn't mean it had to make any kind of logical sense.
It doesn't make any logical sense. No, they can fly and teleport and have wizards.
Or how about I've got a reason how it could make sense.
Go on, please.
She's got all these magical devices on her preventing her from using magic. Maybe they prevent magic being used on her?
We'll take that.
We'll
okay,
take that.
Good
That'll
fix.
do.
Right, so they've just dragged her through the streets. They drag her before Celestia and Luna. Everybody hates her. Shining Armor shows up and gives her the hairy eyeball. He just kind of stares at her.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, Shining Armor. We need to talk about his plot, or lack of.
You mean his aura of death?
His, I am so angry. Wait, I'm not. Bye.
The dark tag, all his character.
He just stares at her with death eyes, like she's hoping that she's going to die. And then they drag her before Celestia and Luna, and they basically have a big argument over whether or not she was justified in eating the love out of the ponies in Canterlot. And Chrysalis thinks it's fine, and Celestia and Luna think it was a terrible thing to do. And Celestia condemns her and then blasts her with a laser, and then everything goes black. And when she wakes up, she's now Silver Skip.
No, wait, there was a dream sequence.
Hang on, wait.
You're forgetting something.
That massive dream.
Her dream. Her nightmare.
Oh, I forgot about the weird dream.
What the hell was that?
And I spent about an hour asking what the hell is going on. I was so lost.
Okay, alright. After Celestia and Luna end up performing their spellbinding circle of death, whatever, on her, she ends up basically having a nightmare where all the ponies are demonic. They're dancing around her. They can't see her. And Coffin shows up with her mangled body in it. And Cadence and Shining Armor are dancing around it, happy. And then next thing you know, Chrysalis waking from her dream, she sees her body being torn apart or something like that.
No. First, everybody starts making out around her
That was
body.
the bit that got me. It's like, yes, kissy kissy smoochy face. What?
Oh, yeah, the WTF moment.
Chrysalis was horrified at the sort of hedonistic gathering her funeral had become. Celebrations, dancing, and kissing continued.
It's like a bacchanalia.
Which is a bit like a bacchanalia, only without any alcohol because it's Ponyland.
But that doesn't make any sense. Ponies don't act like that.
It was a dream, though. It gives creative license.
Then they pull her body out the coffin, and everybody smiles. And then she wakes up, and it was a dream.
But it was such a random veer into the, I need something to make this a dark fic. Right, I'll have sex, I'll have violence, I'll have death, but it was all a dream.
Well, hold on. There is one way that this can be seen as a good part of the story, is that it actually shows on Chrysalis's unspoken fear that even though she is dead now, being dead, you don't know what the hell's going on outside because, well, you're not awake. You're gone.
Yeah, I got the feeling that she was still concerned with being seen as strong and intimidating and frightening. But there just would have been better ways to do it and then they macked.
Well, actually, she made this huge comment about her body in the coffin, when she died, she was in a really terrified pose, and she absolutely hated that, and that she was so disgusted with, even just about more than everything else.
I think the point I would make is this chapter, Dream of a Witch's Sabbath, is 1,600 words long. So it takes 1,600 words to establish this thing. It doesn't take 1,600 words to establish this thing. That's an entire chapter on something that has no relevance to what happens later. You can convey an idea like this much quicker. And I think this more or less sets a tone for the remainder of the story, where there's a thing that happens and
never gets referenced again.
It never gets referenced again, and it takes a long time.
Or, alternatively, the other thing that happens, a very small thing happens, and they keep going on about it again and again and again, ad nauseum.
Okay, so after that...
I was just going to say that it... unbalanced. Not in the sense of being crazy, insane, but like, there was no happy medium of pacing and focus and tone in this. And it can be done. You can have the very conflicting tags, and it would still fit, but this fic just didn't get it right.
It does waver between laser-like focus on a topic that is largely irrelevant and broad strokes over something it should really be paying attention to.
Exactly. Couldn't put it better myself.
It's like someone throwing darts at a dartboard. Every now and then they'll get what they're wanting, and then all of a sudden, up 1 point.
Okay, we're going to very briefly touch on the remainder because there's so many things in this fic that are just bizarre. So Chrysalis wakes up and she's now a pony. In particular, she's a pony called Silver Skip, who now has to go and find a job. And the Celestia has given her a room to live in, but only for a month, and then she's got to go. She's not allowed to leave Canterlot, and she's got to go and find a job and make her way in the pony world. So she goes and gets a job in a restaurant, loses her job in the restaurant because she punches people in the face.
That bit I actually did quite like.
I really liked that bit.
Yeah, I think that was one of the best bits of the fic. That was believable.
That was indeed it was believable simply because the writing for Prince Blueblood was done, and the fact that Chrysalis would act like that to him.
She wasn't a wooby there.
Yeah, and taking the whole food train, whack,
and then standing on his chest and telling him how insignificant he is in comparison to her. Like, you're supposed to be keeping a low profile, but Chrysalis would be really bad at that.
I did miss that for the rest of the story. Swedely, any reaction to this story so far?
Some of the things that you guys talk about, it does sound weird, like the contents of the dream, and a lot of it I can see where the author's coming from. Like with the dream, as somebody said, I forget who it was, it alludes to Chrysalis's fears and just like what she's really thinking about inside. But the part about her suddenly waking up as a pony, that's where I'm sort of lost.
Yeah, Celestia and Luna did this big lasery thing, like, and her horn fell off and it disintegrated, and her wings fell off, and it was like, and then she was like, I'm a pony.
Okay, that all sounds a little bit too violent for the princesses.
It wasn't as violent as you'd think. It was described as black ash falling, and she didn't feel anything, and she was confused because she couldn't feel it as this stuff was dissolving, and then she sort of passed out and woke up.
You want to talk about violent? Luna flipped her
That still sounds... That still sounds really cruel for them. I mean,
it does seem a bit cruel, but we get to the reason of what happened specifically. We find out something in the fic that puts it into a slightly different context. So she loses her job at the restaurant and then goes to a bakery where she gets a job in the bakery as a waitress.
Yeah, doing the exact same thing? What?
You skipped over how she got the job.
That bit about the sandwich was quite nice. I must admit, the thing where she's tasting food for the first time in her life, and it's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and it tastes like manna from heaven. And she thinks, oh my god, I've never realised that taste buds could be quite interesting. I thought, that's actually a really good point. Changelings would probably not eat things.
I really liked that.
And then, sploosh. You have wrecked my sandwich. That was a good moment. And then mortar.
So having wrecked the sandwich of the woman who's never tasted food before, which I will admit is one of those bits where the author takes an idea and is good with it.
The only thing is, that was a really cool thing to do, is like the sandwich is good and then, oh, I'm sorry, I spilled cement on your sandwich. Only problem that I had with that was that is super cliche. Like, total random accident brings boy and girl together. oh my god. I saw it coming a mile away. I said, he's like, oh, hey there, I didn't, oh, you know, and as soon as he, like, had trouble, I was just,
What's it, Crash into Cutie?
yeah, crash into cutie.
Yep, and star-crossed lovers.
I was reminded heavily of Bucket all the way through everything that Rick Mortarbrick ever said.
I hope to think that Bucky is a more likable character and not just such
You're
a...
goddamn right he is!
Bucket is very likable, he's adorable.
Well, Mortar just felt like such a shell.
So naturally, having met this one other man character in the fic, she's going to fall in
Life
love.
begins at man. Here we
Life
go.
begins
That
at
is
man.
the absolute tenet of all female fiction ever that has ever been targeted at me as the only female here. Every single book that's ever marketed for me and for my gender goes, life begins at man. And I wish to clobber whoever came up with this trope.
So naturally, having met this man through misadventure, obviously they're going to get married. But before that, they have to go on a date that's going to be quite awkward.
And it's going to be the most wonderful night of her life.
Does anything interesting happen between Mortarbrick dropping stuff on her food and then they're going on the most magical evening of her life?
No, they're just like, hey, have a date. And they're like, oh yeah.
Something I thought we kind of skimmed over a little bit, I mean, this is going quite a way back, is Chrysalis never wanted this. She wanted to be killed.
That's true. That's worth pointing out that Chrysalis, this is basically hell. She is living hell because she's being forced to be normal.
She was basically begging to die, and then with this, she was sent on her way with guards watching everything she does, and she's spending this entire time up to meeting Mortar and a little while afterwards until that starts to overwhelm her thoughts.
Until that one perfect moment and the one perfect night of her life.
With a little bit of help from Celestia and Luna.
In that whole time, up to meeting Mortar, etc., all she wants is to find a way to get back at Celestia, escape, raise a new army, take over Equestria again.
Did it not occur? I know Luna kind of challenges Celestia on this, and Celestia's like, no, this is the right way. I know what I'm doing. Did it not occur to either of them if they just set her loose in public amongst the people that she really resents, that even as an Earth Pony, she could go on a murderous rampage?
Except they've got guards constantly watching her.
I don't know how fast those guards move, but you can kill at least one person before people get to you.
I guess.
Let's go back to something that's, I think, by this point resolved, which is Luna referring to Chrysalis and her reformation in the same way that she refers to the reformation of Nightmare Moon and what it's like to be a villain, and Shining Armor, who comes to Celestia, I think, about this point with a totally justified and understandable grievance that they've just released possibly the greatest threat to Canterlot in its history in among its streets with like 2 guys watching her.
I'm with him.
And then all of a sudden it just took one little conversation from Celestia to make Shining Armor go, oh, gee, maybe I have been wrong.
And he just disappears from the whole story.
I thought Celestia had some really good points, though.
So Shining Armor goes and talks to her, and Celestia says to him that this is what she wants, and it's really nice, and it's better than murdering her. And Shining Armor's like, okay, and we'll come back to this because this is significant.
We're going to talk about that conversation later, are we?
We are going to talk about this conversation later.
We are going to, because I'm not going to let you forget it.
And Luna says what it's like to be a villain and how the armor grows heavy and that sometimes you just got to throw it off. And I think, does she say that to Chrysalis? Or does
She
say
says
that
it to Chrysalis
Celestia?
after her and Celestia go and visit the shop in their disguises that are not foolproof.
When she wanted to wear a mustache. That was one of the best bits in the fic, was Luna going, I wanted to wear a mustache.
That was actually funny. That was actually funny.
So after this, they go on the best night ever, and Chrysalis starts to think, maybe I could actually be a normal pony. And then I believe she's visited by a dream version of herself when she looks in the mirror.
It's the queen. It's the old queen.
It's the old queen. It's the spirit of the first changeling. Turns to her and says that that's a really terrible idea and she's supposed to be a queen. And Chrysalis, aka Silver Skip, realizes that what she's meant to do with her life is to just wreck things up.
Actually, can I interrupt for a second there?
Yeah.
I thought when she was talking to the changeling in the mirror, I thought she was talking to a part of herself as a result of kind of being intoxicated.
I did at the time as well.
because it was during the hospital scene when she was like, "Who are you?" And she's like, "I'm the Changeling Queen. I'm the first Changeling Queen."
I think it was meant to be a bit of a red herring that we're thinking, oh, maybe she's not completely redeemed. And then we find out later it was the Queen.
Oh, okay.
Because it was very much a subplot of the creation of the Changelings. And I remember thinking at the time, how is this going to fit in? Because it's something I've done before in fiction, is that I'll take part of a chapter or take an entire chapter to tell something that seems completely and utterly not related, because I'm laying the groundwork for something I'm going to drop in later. And I kind of could see that was what FoxyKimchi was doing, setting this up so that the Changeling Queen would appear later. Because originally when that chapter where she starts saying about the old pony convinced this other magician pony to create the changelings that happened by accident, all that bit, I thought it was referring to Chrysalis herself and Starswill the Bearded. And it turned out I was completely wrong. But it turned out to be a random magician and the first Changeling Queen. And I think, in that sense, I was misled by the author on purpose.
I never got that feeling from it at all.
Well, actually, I do agree with you, Scribbler. In the beginning, I was thinking, wait a minute. Did she seduce Starswill the Beard? No, wait, sorry. It's an unknown magician pony.
I remember being quite disappointed that it wasn't Starswill, because I thought, wow, Starswill created the Changelings. That would be a brilliant plot point.
Although, I'm kind of relieved that, for once, there is...
Someone other
they talk about the past, about a magician, and it's not Starswill the Bearded.
I think we can, again, give props to making something different.
Yeah.
There is one thing that that was said about the chapter where it goes through and does an info dump on us, where we go back and find out about the Changeling Queen and how she was originally first created. And I happened to look through the comments, and one of the comments that was left by another well-known author was, if anything, this chapter probably would have had more of an impact if it was used more in the beginning, probably like after chapter 1.
Or just as a prologue, because then it wouldn't have to be connected to anything else, because your prologue is given carte blanche to be a separate thing.
True.
And it's easy to find again when your audience puts it all together.
Yeah. It makes you think, oh, that's what that was for, not, oh, where's that random chapter that I remember reading earlier? This is totally breaking the pace of the fic. Wasn't that just a hint of things to come?
Yes, but if you put it in the start, the audience doesn't know where it's going to fit in later. So,
sorry, can I just quickly confirm, the talk about how the Changeling started, etc., that was at the hospital, right?
I think it was just after she's got the job, and it's a random chapter that appears on its own.
It's before the whole date thing that happens.
It's chapter 5.
Heart of Darkness.
No.
Yeah, here we go. 1009 words. She's just been released into the city, and she's made friends and done all this other stuff. There was quite a long chapter before that. It was 4,000 words. It was the longest chapter of all, was chapter 4 up to that point. And we finally had some momentum going with Chrysalis trying to find her feet. Mortar has been brought into the fic. There was this... I did as Jason did, and I listened to Illya Leonov's reading of it. That was one of the reasons that I suggested doing this one, because I had literally just finished it that day. So I was buzzing with things to say about it. And that, I remember, I listened to things as I walked through fields, walking the dog, and I remember stopping still and thinking, what the hell was that about? Because it suddenly switched to another chapter completely, and this whole bunch of time had passed, and she was about to go on the date. And I thought, why did this come here? Why did this completely break the momentum of the fic when it should have been focused on Chrysalis?
Actually, that does sound familiar.
It made it so that I didn't remember it as much afterwards, because I was just spending the whole time thinking, no, go back to the story I actually tuned in for.
So she goes on the date, it's lovely, she goes back to her house, and she's visited by a spectre of herself who tells her she really wants to be evil. So she decides that she should be evil and that she's getting soft here, so she packs up what stuff she has, she marches for the city walls.
Doesn't she wreck her apartment?
She wrecks her apartment up, yes, she kicks her apartment to pieces.
Like a temper tantrum.
She marches to the city walls to try and get out, and as she gets there, Mortar Brick is on the walls patching up the city walls, and he asks her where she's going, and she shouts at him that she never wants to see him again, that she's going to leave the city, that she hates him, and then Mortar Brick falls off the wall and basically goes into a coma and nearly dies.
Oh my god. This is one of the things in the story that was just like, it made me cringe to read it. Not because he got all messed up, but it was just because, I have feelings for this person. Suddenly, one of them is grievously injured. It's so like Disney movie, or it's so like High School Musical or something. It just seemed like, why? Why does one of them have to be like horribly maimed and injured to move the story along?
Yeah, Brick is horribly injured, and
The coma thing's the most annoying, because then they can't talk about it.
he's in a coma, and he might die, and she drags him to the hospital, and she's all defensive of him, and she won't let anyone touch him, so they have to kick her out so that they can start fixing him up, because she clearly loves him more than anything else in the world ever. So now he's in hospital, in a coma.
But wait, she doesn't realize that until like after, when Mortar's hooked up. She realizes her emotions when she's facing off against the first queen that likes to leech off of the descendants.
Yes, that's true. And then she realizes her true emotions, that she really loves him, and now she has to do a thing to change.
True love conquers all.
True love conquers all.
There's something we skipped over quickly, I'm not sure if it's even really worth commenting on, is the massive shift in her personality between what's forefront on her mind, between taking down Celestia and then just dropping that completely.
It's true, yeah. Yeah.
Was that before or after Celestia saved her life? Because I thought there was a big
That's
shift
before.
from...
It shifts even more after.
I thought, yeah, because I thought the bit was, I wish to kill Celestia. Mort fell off the building. No!
Yeah, she gets really obsessed with that more.
Yeah.
Near death.
Although I kind of equated that to, this is the first time she's ever really actually felt emotion. And probably, actually, I suppose this is debatable, only as a pony she can feel emotion. So does that mean this is the first time she's feeling a great sense of loss, ignoring the whole changeling army thing, because she was a changeling, she couldn't feel emotion?
No, you make a point, but
good point.
as I think this is the whole thing of the fiction, what's happening is not the problem. It's a decent idea. It's a good idea even that suddenly she has to experience real emotion. And it's too much for her, and she's totally thrown by it. What isn't so great is the presentation of it, which is clumsy.
You mean the speed of it, where even though we have a time lapse even though we're told weeks or a month goes by, but it's not long enough.
Yeah, we are told.
Yeah.
We don't get to work that out.
That's something I thought as well. Even though we're told, even in the actual canon of the story, or the fanon of the story, this whole thing is 3 months, give or take. I mean, yeah, it was rushed 3 months, except even 3 months, even if it wasn't rushed, that's a pretty short amount of time.
It's pretty quick for a courtship, especially when one of them's been in a coma for several weeks.
Also, the other one happens to have only been a pony for a short while.
Yeah, the other one doesn't even understand emotions, and all of a sudden she's like, I've got it! I've got all I need! I love you!
That's something that, when we had this chat back in Skype, way before Heroic View started, and we talked a little bit about My Little Dashi, and people mentioned how manipulative it was for somebody's first experience with emotions to be sort of almost used against them. Like, they grow really attached to the one person, the very first person, or pony in this case, that they have had emotions for, about, or regarding. And so that character becomes their whole world, and that just strikes me as really unhealthy.
Yeah, this is a weird... it's not a codependency. She's dependent on Mortar, because Mortar is the only pony who's ever shown her kindness, who isn't her most hated foe.
And it's also willing to be her verbal punching bag, so to speak.
Yeah, he sticks around no matter what she does.
That's something else I thought was pretty good in actually keeping Chrysalis to her character a little bit is, yeah, she was using him pretty much as an emotional punching bag. So, I mean, that still kind of retains her being a bitch of a character, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, their relationship, up to the point he falls into a coma, their relationship is incredibly toxic. And when he's in a coma, it's even more toxic, because she is wholly emotionally dependent on this guy. It's almost like the foundation of their relationship is dependency and guilt.
And him being perfect, he's a Gary Stu. He doesn't do anything to make him a well-rounded character or for her to rail against.
Actually, I disagree. There was one thing. He thinks she is really, really, really hot, and is just putting up with it to stay with her.
That's still Gary Stu for me.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gary Stews and Mary Sues are inevitably quite superficially deep. Usually they'll have a tragic backstory, but admittedly Mortar doesn't have that. But they will be perfect, they will pair off with the main character, they will do nothing to endanger the relationship they have with the main character, and they will essentially be the self-insert of whoever is writing it who admires the main character from canon, wishes to make them happy, but with a character who is almost like a Bella Swan. It's just there for somebody else to think, that could be me.
Fair enough.
Well, to be fair, also, Mortar has, he doesn't have a tragic backstory, but he does have tragedy befall him. Like,
True.
50% of the story, he's not there.
I have to say, the bit where he was in the coma, I got exactly the same emotions from him as when he was out of the coma, because he was, he made that much of an impact.
There was a moment where he actually showed a little bit more than just, oh, I'm smitten with her, or this and that.
Can I interrupt a sec? Because what happens when he's in the coma, gets a little bit more complex. So I think it's worth discussing what we think of the story up until this point in terms of how it works, because it's so much less character-based from here on in. It's almost all story and exposition. We'll pause going further in the story, and let's talk about some of the stuff we were going to later. And
Something we still have a pin in is Celestia's chat with Shining Armor.
And just Celestia in general.
So, Celestia's plan here, overall, is to blast Chrysalis to be a pony for a bit, in the hope that she redeems herself, and decides she wants to become a pony. And basically, this entire story is Celestia has an opinion, and it's objectively correct. Do we see that as a very common Celestia trope?
Yes.
Absolutely. She is always bucking right. Even the story will warp around what she says to be right all the time.
I really liked her character in this. I really liked it. I thought she was really wise. I mean, the chat with Shining Armor and Luna, and I remember there was a couple of others actually with Chrysalis as well. I don't remember what exact points she brought up, and they were debated against by the opponent in the conversation, but I thought she absolutely got the better of him, and she had such a good point with everything that she was saying. I really, really enjoyed her character in this. I thought she was really well characterized.
If anything, you Reverb, you were saying that basically you liked her character because she was the wise leader. If anything, to me, I felt like she was trying to be more of a wise leader, but from the perspective of the motherly figure.
Oh, absolutely. Massively. Yes. Except I kind of see her as canon anyway. I can't stand when people write her as a tyrant.
I think that was more of a season 1 trope than post that.
Although a few times in the story there were a few, as some people in the comments have said, oh, hey, look, this event here was a Celestia moment. Well, not really. The way I saw it was just like her being wise and also having a little bit of fun with the situation.
She was just super matronly. She was mega mom mode all the way.
Because she was referring to them all as her children all the way through.
She said My Little Ponies too a couple times, and I was going to get on her case about that, but then
that makes sense in context.
Then I realized that she said it in the show, so I was about to get upset over that, but
I have to say that for what is presented about her, I liked Celestia in this.
Can I just say then that I've always liked Celestia's presentation essentially as she's basically Superman. She's basically Superman. She's physically perfect. She's super strong, super tough. She's a genius. She's incredibly social. If she sets her mind on a course of action, you can generally assume that it's the correct one, and she always takes the high road. She's not really a character as much as she is an inspirational figure.
The ultimate Mary Sue.
She's like Harry Potter, a canon Sue or Stu.
I don't think a story from her perspective really works all that well unless there's a lot of other characters to have a perspective from.
Oh, like Eternal.
Eternal, yes, Eternal.
Well, that's when I imagine you give her some flaws or something to chew over. If she's just going into a situation, she has an opinion, it's going to be the right one, because that's the point of her character. Her character is she's always right, because she's a genius. She always takes the high road.
Wait. Why do you keep saying she's a genius? I don't think she's a genius. I think she just, it's never really explicitly implied that she's
well
super
practiced
smart. She's just
1,000 years of
experienced.
practice.
I'm using this I'm extrapolating from my concept of her as sort of this exemplar character. And generally with those, they're good at everything. Because the point of them is they're not really a character so much as they are either an ideal that their other characters are trying to pursue, or they're a fixture of the setting. In this case, she's basically God.
I'm trying to think who it was who said that Celestia is very, very hard to write anything about Celestia as a main character because she is the linchpin of the series. She exists to be unchangeable, that she has to be the matronly motherly figure. She has to be the one who is always right, because otherwise the entirety of the rest of canon, as far as the show itself goes, doesn't work. She cannot be seen to have emotions and frailties and things like that, because that means that the rest of it doesn't work. Whereas in Fanon, it's taken a different turn. Like we have Molestia, like we have Trolestia, like we have Tyrant. And it's easier for us to characterize her in different ways. But that also runs the risk of, because in canon she has to be, for logistical purposes, unchangeable, everything with her outside of that tiny little remit will feel out of character.
We were talking about her being sort of a perfect character, and I was sort of trying to think of what stands out about her in this, and I feel like the love factor is just dialed up to 20. She just loves, it's absolutely spewing love for everyone. I love that about her character in this. I don't know, I thought that was something which was a little specific more so to this, is that it's just so much love for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are continuously talking about how she's the perfect character, and I will admit, in the show, she is portrayed as, like, immaculate in every way. I mean, her color, she's white, the traditional color of purity. In the defense of perfect Lestia, or I guess in the opposite of defense of perfect Lestia, she does have one major thing that she did in the past when she banished Luna that could possibly be considered an unperfect thing. Like, she banished her own sister for 1,000 years.
And yet we know so very little about what happened. So maybe post-season 4, we'll get more of this. But I have to say, there is one major thing she's done in canon fairly recently that makes me think, not perfect. Here is the King of Chaos. He nearly f***ed you all up. Release him, and I'll see you later.
Who cares? We got John Delancey.
Yeah, there's a couple of cases where she just hands everything over to them. I mean, same with saving the crystal ponies. I mean, I was kind of on Luna's side.
And she's lazy as shit, isn't she?
Send Luna along.
She uses
just in
people
case.
and then expects favours.
I defend this because I think the ideal behind Celestia is sort of the same ideal, and I go back to like any exemplar, is that Celestia is kind of a pulp hero in a way, in that Celestia has basically won. Everything that she does, she's basically perfect at. She's mortal. Everything that she sets her hand to, she's great at. And the idea is that she sets all these tasks for people, and she gets all these people to do stuff.
Except junk food.
Which they do. She does like cake.
Dat flank.
Cake.
But the idea is she has this civilization of creatures similar to herself, and she's trying to bootstrap them up to her level. She wants everybody to come join her and be amazing at everything. She's trying to teach everybody that the high road is the best road to pursue. There's a comment I remember someone making, which is that morality is essentially a luxury. You have to pay for it. If you have morals, you're denying yourself access to certain routes that you could use to solve a problem. So if you're trying to high road solve the problem of discord, you've just erased 90% of the ways you could deal with him. So you're left with reforming him, and you can either reform him with your friendship gun, or you can reform him by using a friendship spell, which is morally ambiguous anyway.
Friendship gun?
The elements of harmony is basically a big rainbow laser of friendship.
Thing.
Deus Machina.
But the point of her is, by being the fact that she's so basically perfect, there's no problem she couldn't have. Like, she makes the point in this fic, I believe, that she purposefully loses to Chrysalis, because if she doesn't, she'd win easily, but she would wreck everything up and everyone would be afraid of her.
Seriously, whoa. Well, she only has 2 settings on her, like, horn power
Yes, she
level.
does.
Just barely enough and apocalypse. Like, what?
She's teaching them a lesson about friendship. But the point of Celestia is she wants everyone to know that they can solve these problems. Like, every time she goes into a room, everyone bows. Twilight's afraid to talk to her. She doesn't want these things, but she can't not have them. Pounce.
No thanks. I want my immortal alicorn goddess to be godlike. I don't want to worry about the person that we literally almost worship as a deity just got her ass kicked. Oh.
It's her choice. That's what she wants. We're talking about Celestia in general here. The whole point of her is she can easily solve all of these problems, and all the ponies have to do is sit in the house eating crisps and everything will be fine forever. But she doesn't want that. She really doesn't. She wants them out to go and strive. And see, she can leap in at any time and save the day, which means there's no harm in her letting her subjects actually fix a problem on their own, because if it goes wrong, she can sort it out.
Something I've just thought, when have we actually seen her save the day? I mean, when she defeated Nightmare Moon, that was using the elements of harmony. I mean, we assume that she is this all great and powerful.
Remember when she showed up and she banished that spell that no one could deal with, where everyone loved...
the one it needed spell, yeah.
She got rid of that lickety-split.
Clearly that's a low power setting, because Ponyville was still there afterwards.
I was going to say, that doesn't seem like a huge, massive display of her overwhelming power.
Celestia has lived for 1,000+ years, and yet she didn't know what Parasprite was. Seriously?
Yeah.
Oh, fair play, actually.
Wow, that's a good point. There's some logical inaccuracies in the show itself. That's good to
That's what
good to
fanfiction's
think
supposed
about.
to be for fixing canon.
That is what fanfiction's for, is to paper over these cracks.
And she gets the main Manhattan or Las Vegas, wherever it was, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I just saw these over in Ponyville.
Also, Pinkie Pie went by with the Parasprite parade. She just kind of watched it like, oh, that's interesting. But she didn't freak out like, oh, what are those? She was like, oh, what lovely little creatures. Because she knew.
Yeah, she's being coy.
She's being coy.
Let's go on to what we were talking about earlier. We touched on it with Shining Armor, and it happens with Chrysalis as well. The ideological conflicts in this story and how they all resolve in essentially the same awkward way.
Well, my major issue in this is that, much as I like Celestia's depiction in this, it does seem to be that her way is the only one true way allowed in Equestria. In this particular fic, the framework is she and her people were starving. She was trying to feed them with love, got greedy, blah, blah, blah. While I can agree that her methods for doing that were wrong, the actual concept of what she was doing was quite sympathetic. And yet, the whole thing with Celestia is, you must do things my way. And there is a line somewhere later in the fic where Chrysalis essentially says, I didn't understand before, but now I can see that your way was the best way. And part of me just shriveled up when I heard that, because it just made me think, no, this is not how you present a democracy. And as much as Celestia it's a monarchy, she is in charge, she seems to purport this idea that the ponies are able to govern themselves. We've sort of covered that.
Oh, actually, one thing is every time Chrysalis or Silver Skip says to Celestia, I submit, you win, your way is better. And Celestia always says, I don't want it to be seen as I win. And then I thought perhaps that was a sort of cross between their characters.
Maybe, but Celestia doesn't do much to dispel that idea. I do get what you mean, that Chrysalis, her only frame of reference for ruling is queen in charge of all, and therefore that's what she transfers and maps onto Celestia. She thinks, right, if I'm going to live here, I must adhere to new queen. But the point I was making was not that Chrysalis did that, although it is actually quite a good point I hadn't thought of. My point was that Celestia presents Equestria as this sort of paradise where ponies can be free to make their own decisions, govern themselves, but if they get into trouble, she can save them.
Except Mortar.
Apart from Mortar. But her actions don't bear this out, because as soon as she comes across somebody whose very fundamental ideological differences clash with hers, she essentially converts them, forcibly converts them. And the entire fic itself is a forcible conversion to the Celestia mindset. And there is no argument that you have to do things this way, the pony way. And Chrysalis does eventually convert to this. The point that I'm trying to make, probably very inarticulately, is the wider implications of this. What happens if anybody else ever disagrees with Celestia or disagrees with this particular mindset of the equestrian way of life is the only way of life? Was that what happened with Nightmare Moon? Is that what's going to happen with Griffins? Does everything have to be her way or the highway? Or she will forcibly change you into a pony and you'll have to live in her kingdom by her rules?
I kind of saw this as just such an extreme thing because it's either this or just death.
Yeah, that's my point, exactly. Chrysalis is not given a choice. He's all, right, I wish to die. Tough, you're going to be a pony.
Well, I thought it was sort of Celestia's extreme way to be able to in any way justify it to anyone else who questions it, at the same time being able to save her life.
Yeah, it's not the fic itself that really bothers me. It's the implications of it in a wider context. Nobody's allowed to disagree or hold their own opinions. They're allowed to think they are, but they're not actually. And that just rubs me up the wrong way.
What I'd like to add in, because it's relevant, is just that at about this point, we see the character change. And the character changes again to get even, in my mind, worse, because she's robbed of agency. She stops having an ideal other than, man, I really want to get in with this pony. And that's basically her entire agenda for the remainder of the story.
Again, I mean, it might be a bit of a cheap way out, except I keep seeing that as this is her first experience with emotion, and she realizes this is so much better than everything else, and she just is clinging to it desperately and just does not want to let it go.
I think it might just be personal opinion here, but she goes from wanting to be queen of the insect people to she works in a sandwich shop, and she's going out with this guy because of a really toxic guilt-based relationship.
Except she doesn't realize it's a toxic guilt-based relationship. She just sees it as a first relationship.
Man, this is really painting Moderator as a prick.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so depressing. Just talk about the characters. There's not really that many characters. And one thing I'd like to say is what really got under my skin is everybody talks the exact same way in this story. They all use the same words, and none of them use conjunctives. I don't know if any of you noticed that. They all say things like can not and do not.
They're right proper canterlot ponies, good sir.
They're not. Nobody talks like that.
I don't know anything about FoxyKimchi, but in my experience, in my real life job, this sounds like something written by somebody either very inexperienced with writing, who hasn't written much before, or is quite young.
Well, if they are really young, or if this is one of their really first work, I think it's a pretty damn good job.
Yeah, it would be nice to know something more about FoxyKimchi, because then I could probably say, actually, this was really good for the person who wrote it out, but because I don't, all I can do go is on the fic itself.
Okay, so Shining Armor and his complaints to Celestia, where he shows up and basically gives a fairly reasonable comment that this is a really terrible plan. And Celestia basically says, nah, it's cool. And he says, okay, yeah, fine. And then never reappears in the story.
Well, he does get to say his bit. Actually, this is a really bad idea. And I can't remember if it was Cadence or Celestia who then said, but if you call for blood, are you not as bad as them? And then he just goes, oh, you're right. And he drops out of the fit completely.
Celestia brought up a specific point which just completely checkmated his entire argument. I don't remember what it was, though.
Well, that whole conversation really rankled with me. The stuff that rankled most was that after that, he was gone. He had no further part in the fiction. And I think anything dealing with Chrysalis, he and Cadence should have had a part in this. Even if it was just turning up at the end to say, wow, actually she just did really well. But they don't. Twilight who turns up.
I don't think Cadence had a single part in this story at all.
Apart from the dream sequence where she started macking on her husband in front of a dead body,
Yeah.
She wasn't in it.
It's kind of cheap in that you have the character going, well, maybe we should kill the person who attempted to murder me and my wife. And then the moral high ground character says, well, if we kill them, are we no better than them? And then the character has to go, oh, as though there's some deep wisdom being imparted.
I don't think that was the thing she says which kills off his argument. There was something else. I don't remember what it was, but it wasn't that.
Let's move on to the aspect I call the shift to the fantastic. So we are in the hospital, and Mortarbrick is there, and all of a sudden Death shows up, and they have a conversation that lasts for 11,000 words. No, he's the Death of Ponies. He's Mort, the Death of Ponies.
Also, can I just say, Mort and Mortarbrick, f***ing terrible choices for names. if you're reading quickly, you get really confused. I realize it's from another story. Name your Gary Stu something else, please.
He could just be called Brick. That would have been done. Brick.
Or call Mort something else.
So this character shows up, and then the fiction goes to a very crazy place where Brick is taken around places to see that he probably wants to be alive. And then Mort summons the death of Changelings, who shows up and basically says, "Oh, so why are you attracted to this woman?" And he's like, "I guess I just am." And that inspires him to get back to life.
No, I was just going to say that as far as concept goes, I liked this chapter for better than the rest. As it wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and it probably says something that the chapter in which it involves characters from somebody else's story is the one I like better, before I knew they were from somebody else's story. But this chapter, I liked it because it did something different than the rest of the fic, and I hated it because it didn't matter one iota.
Okay, first off, the chief point, I 100% agree with Scribbler. We could have not had that chapter. The story would be absolutely the same because he wouldn't remember it. And it was like, why did you put us through all that? I mean, why did you put us through this ridiculous story of you flying around Ghostland when we could have actually been developing Chrysalis's character for 11,000 words?
Mm-hmm.
Second point, why did he have to go through this ridiculously stupid, painful, annoying process to get back to his body? Super Gary Stu, he has to do this super impossible task to win back the mare of his dreams, and it's so painful, but he's gonna get through it because he loves her. And
I thought that bit wasn't too bad. It's kind of representing not him getting back to her as much as how tough it is to recover from a coma depending on how severe it is.
I think we should ask the question, what did the story gain by having him in a coma?
It gained
nothing.
Chrysalis realizing how much he actually means to her.
Did he need to be in a coma for that?
I think he needed to be taken away.
It was a quick fix.
He needed to be taken away completely for her to realize how much of a loss it is to lose him.
I remember thinking it would be a really ballsy move of the author to actually kill him off. I remember thinking at the time, they probably won't, but that would actually make this story so much more interesting, especially if she'd been found next to the body and then been accused of killing him. And I thought that's where they might be going. When they said, oh, they found her next to the body, she pushed him off. Maybe she's not been reformed and she has to then think, actually, this is the kind of life I do want, and prove that she wants to be. Not just, oh, he's dead, oh my god.
Or they find her next to the body and she gets implicated for murder and Celestia's like, I guess we couldn't reform you after all. And they kill her. Twist, dark ending.
I need to break everybody's heart. Have you read the author notes?
God, right back at the beginning.
Mortar dying and then finding Chrysalis next to his body and suspecting her of killing him was the direction it was going to go until the author decided to go with putting Mort in it instead.
Well, hindsight.
Yeah. I'd also like to put for context a brick pony and a pale pony. The chapter that gives us a lot of information that then has no effect on the story whatsoever is 1/6 of the entire length of the story. So, in amongst that, we also have the dark spirit that empowers all changelings. The Empress of all changelings appears, and Chrysalis totally loses, and she begs Celestia for help. How do we feel about that?
Yeah, what?
Okay, so the evil dark spirit of all changelings shows up, demands that Chrysalis, basically says, Chrysalis, if you murder this guy, you'll totally become a changeling again. Chrysalis thinks about it for a second, that in a way that I don't think had any of us fooled, and then she says no, and then the spirit of the first changeling tries to murder her. Chrysalis totally loses, and then she begs Celestia to save her. How do we feel about that series of events? Do we feel that it does justice to Chrysalis's character?
I'm on the fence on that one. I see the good points of that being in the story, basically allowing Chrysalis to finally figure out which way she's going to go emotional-wise. And
I get why that part of the story was in there. That was supposed to be, I think, the turning point in the story where Chrysalis realizes that, oh, Celestia's way is right. You know, it's good to have feelings and ask others for help and not be so proud and everything. And so she calls Celestia for help. And Celestia comes in and God modes everything and saves her, which really, what was the word you used, Scribbler? Rackled or something?
Rankled.
Rankled. That really rankled me. Because, I mean, it's just like God mode Celestia saves the day. There was absolutely no depth to like that. She was in this hallway and there were pictures of her and Mort and everything in her life, and there was so much that the author could have done to like have Chrysalis fight back and defeat the Changeling Queen herself, you know, because she's got all these strong emotions for Mortar and she could prove her love that way, and it would be great if her own newfound feelings helped pull her out of the muck, and, you know, she breaks free and she defeats the Changeling Queen herself to really solidify her feelings. But no, she goes, "Oh, Celestia, help me," and Celestia comes in and she's just like, "Fire, be purged," and everything's fine. And it seemed like such a cheap way out to kill off the villain.
Yeah. Yeah, right, actually. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it does rob Chrysalis, as it's been doing the whole way through the fic. It robs Chrysalis of her emotional arc.
I mean, I agree, it robs her, except I think it also kind of gives a little bit in her faith in Celestia, or to be able to actually ask for help and accept help, which is something she's never done before up till now.
Yeah, I can see that. But that does beg the question that is her arc ending the way it should have then? Rather than her becoming independent, she's becoming dependent on Celestia.
Jason actually brings up a good point, and as I said earlier, this is, I believe, supposed to be the turning point, but I think if we took that, would you call Celestia for help? Celestia can come in and save the day indirectly, I think would be the right way, to help maybe guide Chrysalis to fight against the Changeling Queen, you know, by maybe guiding her hoof a little bit. Just, it really bugs me that she called for help for Celestia, and Celestia's solution, rather than to help Chrysalis develop emotionally, was to come in and just be like, and I couldn't handle it.
Was it because of the so over-the-topness of it?
Yeah, it was also super cheeseball. Like, I literally had to put my phone down and go back to work, and for those of you who know me, that is like something I never do.
Well, I'll be honest, I thought that part was really, really cool, except I was able to kind of let it go, I suppose, in the fact that it's all in the mind. It's not actually happening, per se. It's sort of, I suppose I saw it more as figurative.
I think the major disadvantage is, as Pounce says, Chrysalis realizes that she can't defeat it alone. What I think would have worked better is Celestia comes and shows her that she can defeat it, whereas what we get is Celestia shows up and sun lasers the evil to death.
She comes in and spirit bombs the evil spirit.
Yeah, that would have been a good sort of nod to both those.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say when I said about it robs Chrysalis of the end of her arc, that it should have been that she comes to an understanding. Otherwise it rings hollow a little bit like brainwashing for her to say your way is the true way, when it felt like she hadn't finished her arc. That's all I kept coming back to, is it didn't feel like she had made the last bit of the progression that she should have, that we were promised by the rest of the fic.
So we have Chrysalis, the evil is defeated, Brick wakes up, and they reunite, and then
they kiss.
First they kiss. Then Chrysalis, as Silver Skip, goes and gets the princesses of their kingdom to come into the room while she talks to her boyfriend and says, "I'm actually the Queen of the Changelings."
And then he just takes it in stride. WTF.
That's when they should have left in the bit with Mort. They should have left in that chapter, because it would have made much more sense.
What we have is that we repeat the whole Mort thing again.
And thus we come to my major beef with this fic. The entire last third is just going over and over and over the stuff that happened in the first 2/3. And I remember listening to this, and I skipped through. I was pressing fast forward and thinking, nope, there's nothing new yet. And I managed to get through to the end faster than I should have, because I didn't miss anything.
There wasn't really any new material added after that.
Actually, one quick thing. I found the line which Celestia says to Shining Armor, which just completely shuts him down. Alright, Shining Armor is basically saying, she deserves to die, and Celestia says, so if someone massively threatens Equestria, they deserve death, and he's like, yes. And she basically said, so I should have killed my sister. And he was just like,
No, that's true. That's a good point, because they do link Nightmare Moon to Chrysalis repeatedly through the fic, about heavy armor and the burden of responsibility and how it can turn you into something that you're not, something more hard-hearted and something more cold.
But let's take a quick objective look. If they killed everybody who threatened Equestria. Luna's dead, no big deal. Celestia can rule on her own. Discord's dead, no big deal. He didn't do anything for anyone. King Sombra's dead. Hooray!
Okay, so we then have multiple sort of false endings where it seems like it's going to finish, but then they decide to re-go over the material they've had. This is a problem, I think, with some fics when there's a lack of confidence that the writer assumes that let's just keep going over. I'm not happy with that ending. I'll do it again. And it's a lack of editing. I think people don't know how to edit, and they don't know how to pick what's relevant, and they're worried that what they have isn't good enough, so they add more stuff to make up for that. I don't know if that is a common thing in fanfic.
That's a common thing in all fiction. The number of authors I've read where I've just thought, oh god, get you a good editor. Including classic canon fics.
Exactly. They feel this compulsive need to tie up every single loose end from every character that was ever mentioned at any point in the story. They've got to wrap everything up.
Except Shining Armor.
Except shining bloody armor!
Except the one thing we wanted closure to.
Honestly, I get where it's annoying that he got rid of. I didn't really care about that he wasn't in there.
I don't care that he wasn't in there. It just felt wrong that everybody else was getting a last, and this is what happened, except him when he was kind of framed almost as the villain character. In which case, why did we get this weird little epilogue featuring Twilight? Wouldn't it have made more sense for him to be in that?
Actually, yes. Let's go on to the epilogue. Honestly, this features my favourite bit of this story is in the epilogue. The epilogue's okay. Twilight shows up. Chrysalis thinks it would be a great idea to see if she recognises her. She does. They have a conversation. Everyone's fine. The bit that I liked was Twilight says, "Oh, do you regret any of it?" And she says, "Nope."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally justified. And I wanted more of that character. That was the character I wanted. There's a point I want to make, which is, forgive me for going into pop culture here, there's a bit in Doctor Who where I'm sure at least one person over here has watched this.
Yes.
Where they have a character called Donna Noble. And at the end of a series, she basically gets all of the Doctor's knowledge dumped into her head, and she becomes something remarkable and unique.
Dr. Donna.
Dr. Donna, and she's dying. And she says, "I'd rather die as something miraculous than live as something boring." And the Doctor pulls all the information out of her and saves her life. And that's what this feels like to me. The character of Chrysalis goes from this willful character who has ideals and they're not matching anyone else's. She has an objective, she has a goal, she's driven, and piece by piece that's taken away from her until what's left is something that is compliant. She's essentially a participant in her own story, and she stops wanting anything except to be with the love of her life, who's a guy who dropped paste on her sandwich.
Yet again,
and they
more
went
Gary
on one
Stew.
date. The Gary Stew. They went on one date, and suddenly she's everything she ever wanted. There's nothing left of her.
He's the first she ever found. I mean, yeah, I know he's painted to be Gary Stew and rather perfect, except...
Yeah, I would have liked it if she'd had a romance with somebody who used her and left her, and then she has to come to terms with negative emotions as well as positive ones.
The issue, I think, with the story is that it assumes there is a right answer, and the right answer is Silver Skip and Mortar Brick live happily ever after and do exactly what Celestia wants them to do. The story is, how long is it going to take Chrysalis to realise that's the right answer? And really, this is all about the story, when it should have been all about the character. And I think that's the biggest sin that FoxyKimchi does, is he's got these wonderful ideas for her character, but then he makes it about the story. And the story doesn't matter. What matters is the changes that happen to Chrysalis as the story goes on.
Yes. Yes.
Well said, Mr. Devlin.
And that's why we've spent 2 hours pulling apart how badly written the story is. Because, I'm sorry to say, the story's a bit naff. But the ideas that FoxyKimchi has for the arc are fine. They're great. They're really good. If you look at it as a character piece, why are the changeling drones mindless and motionless things? Because they don't matter.
Because it was easier than going into it.
Why does Shining Armor just vanish? Because he doesn't matter. It's there to make a point and move on. The biggest sin of the story is we pick it apart because we're made to care about it. If it was just about Chrysalis and her journey, we wouldn't care. But because we are here for this plot, because the whole story up until now has been about the plot and the story that is happening around the character, we care more about that than the choices she's making, because the choices she's making are so superficial, because we already know the choices she's going to make, because we know this story.
I think that's probably a good note to end on.
Yeah, we'll end on that. because I think we've said everything that we can possibly say about this particular story. So, this was the second ever episode of the Heroic Review, and my panel today was me, Deadlyreg, acting as moderator. We had Pounce. Say goodbye, Pounce.
This has been Pounce, and I am gone.
Say goodbye, Reverb.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. See ya.
Say goodbye, Scribbler.
Be lovely to each other, and good night, everybody.
Say goodbye, Swedely.
This is Swedely, signing off.
Say goodbye, Webshoter.
Thank you for having me here, and see you later.
Once more, thanks for listening, and good night.